Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I'm going to continue my segments on analysing the Necron Codex. Today I'm going to look at Flayed Ones, sort of a really strange melee unit for the Necrons, one that lore-wise they've suffered a disease. I think it was a previous dynasty suffered a sort of disease or curse on them, and it caused them to basically find their opponent, shred them, wear their skin, and all this other weird stuff with the Flayed Ones. And they're also able to appear from nowhere and do a lot of damage, and other Necrons sort of shun them. But they can be useful because they can do a fair bit of damage. So how this works is that we're going to have a look at the unit itself in the Codex. I'm then going to have a look at weapon options available and special abilities. From there I'm going to have a look at loadout suggestions and role that they do play, dynasty codes where applicable, and stratagem recommendations. So with that, let's have a look at the Flayed Ones. Flayed Ones are movement 5, which is standard for Necron infantry, though I would say is a detriment for light infantry melee units. Just ones at their point cost, that can be a bit of a pain, opening up with that one. Weapon skill 3+, which is kind of fine, what you expect for melee units. Plus skill 6+, we don't care about that. Strength and toughness of 4, which is kind of fine for, Necron standard infantry units. We'd want that strength to be 5, but we're not going to get it. Wounds of 1, which seems fine. 3 attacks apiece, which is a fair amount of attacks to get. That gives them sort of a bit more horde shredding abilities. Leadership 10, which is standard, and a 4+ save, which is similar to Necron warriors but not immortals. It means that they don't survive as much small arms fire, which, trust me, these guys are gonna probably be a target of. They are armed with flare claws, which are melee weapons, strength users, strength 4, no AP and 1 damage, but you can reroll failed wound rolls for this weapon. So that's all about dice, dice, dice. You are an average strength of 4, which is okay, but no AP is probably a big detriment to that one. They do have reanimation protocols, which is standard for Necrons. Flesh hunger: if any Flayed Ones slay an enemy model, slay any models in a unit, the unit subtracts 1 from leadership characteristics until the end of the turn. Fine, but I'll go into a bit more detail. And haunting horror: during deployment, you can set up this unit in a channel pocket dimension. Awesome. Instead of placing on the battlefield at the end of any of your movement phases, the Flayed Ones can crawl into reality, set them up anywhere in the battlefield that's more than 9 inches away from enemy models. So your kind of deep strike tactical reserves ability there, which gives them a lot more in terms of, they are light infantry models. They do have the ability to sneak in and obviously get to their target, though 9 inches away is a little bit tricky on that one. So let's go into loadout suggestions and role. Mainly the role there, because they don't have any weapons options. I just call this segment "We Come to Feast and Shred." So Flayed Ones are a simple unit. They want to get in combat and throw dice at your opponent. Given a certain dynasty code, we'll go into that later, and kind of their only dynasty code, these guys can ensure your opponent will be rolling a lot of dice when it comes to saves. So let's talk about their strengths. 3 attacks apiece is not bad. Ensuring a bunch of attacks is okay, along with strength 4, which is alright, but strength 5 would make a heck of a lot of difference when you're going to wound, especially for the fact of they've got no AP. But having the ability to reroll wounds certainly does add up a lot of pressure on your opponent. However, this is the part where we now go into weaknesses, and frankly I think there's many of them. They are slow. For a light assault unit, this is a major weakness. Small arms fire, even with 1 AP, which Space Marines now have plenty of ways to get that, will absolutely shred these guys. So standing about on field or walking up the field is simply not an option. If you do this, you're kind of asking to waste points. We then come to the haunting horror rule, which essentially allows you to deep strike. Good, this allows you a reliable way to get them there, or at least where they want to go. I say reliable, but it still means a 9-inch charge to just about anything you are looking at, and then obviously if they're screening it might be even worse. With a fair few, very few ways to actually reroll this, does make these guys tricky, and failing a charge with them can be absolutely detrimental to their survival and will likely result in them being targeted and obliterated. Flesh hunger: the -1 morale if a unit suffered a casualty to them. I find morale modifiers less useful these days, though there are combos to be devastating. I think Tyrannids and Elder certainly have plenty of ways to do minus morale and make it seem very, very effective. Necrons, not so much so. I would say that any unit within 6 inches of this unit and suffers a morale test must roll 1 extra dice and discard the highest. I think this would work a lot better and make morale just that little bit more, a bit more useful. I think this works for units that, if you roll another dice and, discard the lowest, it kind of works out, I think, maybe. I'm not sure how it works in those situations entirely, but I just feel that fear and having, one more to a leadership test is just not something to write home about. I think that just needs to be kind of worked to be a little bit more, useful. Finally, and the second biggest weak problem after mobility is that they are strength 4 and no AP. This means that anything armoured will likely shrug off a lot of the attacks that come their way, and although they do get to reroll wounds, wounding toughness 4 stuff on 4 and toughness 8 and 6s is gonna pretty much shrug stuff off. These guys make their way through guardsmen, but then again, what doesn't? But then again, a lot of other things can, be a bit more reliable. Say if you charge gaunts or orc boys, you are going to really shred them apart. However, equally, those units, if they charge you at full capacity, will probably wipe out the Flayed Ones themselves. We'll have a look at, let's have a look for orc boys, for instance. So, there's not much difference in terms of stats. They do get a lot of attacks, they don't get the rerolls, they don't get the deep strike, but there's a lot of similarities between them, especially once the buffs on the orcs go off. Orc boys are roughly, though, 10 points cheaper, I think, give or take, a point or two cheaper than a Flayed One. That is a lot of points per model difference for something I would argue is not far off similar. And they have a huge amount of synergy abilities that just make them work a lot better. Reanimation protocols can be good. I imagine that's a lot of where the points may be going. I can't imagine the points may go into the reroll wounds, might be the fact they can deep strike, etc. But 10 points a model is a hefty investment. That's quite a lot. Heck, with Space Marine's new shock assault rule and maybe a chainsword, they can throw out just as much attacks as well. Alright, they don't get the rerolls to wound, etc., but they get a lot of attacks and they generally will be just as reliable. So, that just means that versus point-wise, these, they've got some use to them, but points-wise, that's quite expensive. So there's little we can do about the strength and AP. There's some things we can do, but not very much. We need to live with that, but what can we do about the said mobility and unit roll we want them to do? If you favour a big squad, if you want to take a 20-man squad and absolutely throw dice at your opponent and charging them in, there's a couple of ways. I would not use Veil of Darkness unless you want badly to get a turn 1 charge, because you're still, charging from 9 inches away, so you still have to move quite far away. And other things like the Deceiver are not so useful because you can't charge in turn 1. In parts, you could move in with the Deceiver and get into position, you'll be probably blown to bits by small arms fire as is. So I don't really rate that one either. So what we can do to try and make this easier to get into combat, well, this I think is going to go quite against the lore, and I don't know if it works out that way lore-wise, and I'm pretty sure there's nothing in the rules that says you can't do this, correct me if I'm wrong, but a Night Scythe is probably the most reliable way to get them into combat and where you need them to be. A few Night Scythes, and one of the units being Flayed Ones inside them, can be tricky. Move into position and drop the unit very, very close to where you want to be, and then you'll get to, when you disembark, I think you get to move afterwards as well, but either way, when you're coming in Night Scythe, you are going to be close to your opponent. This is a very, very good way to take a large 20-man squad into the position you want to be. You just need to be very careful of your opponent trying to swamp the Night Scythe and stop you from being able to deploy from it. But if you've got multiple Night Scythes, then that's Dave's preferred way to actually play Necrons, is multiple Night Scythes and deploy in various locations. So I do think that works out best way to possibly take a 20-man squad. fly in a couple inches away from your opponent, invasion beam in, and get them to move on. I think lore-wise it absolutely butchers it, but as far as I can tell it does work, so hey. Other than this, Haunting Horrors is still a viable option. Deep striking in but without an extra dice for rerolls is just make them not very dependent. It only means you've got what, a 66% chance, if not probably less, of actually, 33% chance of actually making in, if not less. So it is, you know, very, very tricky in that one. If you are going to deep strike in, I would almost say take them in small groups and just try and charge in and try and get, you know, use them to hunker down the units you want to stop them, and like maybe 3 units of 5 and just like charge into small clumps. You might lose them to Overwatch, it does happen. I recently suffered a horrendous amount of Overwatch from David, where I think in a Space Marine one with the new Imperial Fist he got like 22 hits, which absolutely shredded me in Overwatch, and against these Flayed Ones I'm pretty sure it would absolutely shred them as well. So you do have the option of the Haunting Horrors, but you know, and then if you fail to get in it's going to be tragic, but it is another way of them to viably get in. I really want to try the Night Scythe way. I haven't tried it yet because I don't have enough Flayed Ones ready, though they are just waiting to get painted, but you know, that would be almost my best way of getting in and getting past the mobility part if you do decide to aim at big squad. Dynasty Code traits. Let's go with Novak, Awakened by Murder. You can reroll failed hit rolls in the fight phase for units with this Dynasty Code if they charged, were charged, or performed a heroic intervention. I mean, I don't think I'm going to entertain really any of the other ones when it comes to Flayed Ones. When you're rolling so much dice, this will add a fair few attacks. A full unit of 20 will put out 60 attacks, which roughly 20 will miss. This should roughly add about another 12 to 13 hits or so. Don't quote me on the math. However, it will add a fair amount of dice, and I don't think there's any real debating any other Dynasty Code that you should be taking over this one. Also, it's my playstyle to play Novak Dynasty Necrons, so there is that as well. I just think with such a dedicated combat unit, Novak is pretty much a given. Stratagem recommendations. Let's go with Disruption Field. 1 command point. Use the stratagem when an infantry unit from your army fights in the fight phase. Increase the strength of all models in the unit by 1 until the end of the phase. Handy stratagem to have for 1 command point. I think this will be important if you verse anything that is toughness 4, 5 or 8. Why these specifically? Well, toughness 4 will be wounded on 3s, toughness 5 will be wounded on 4s, and toughness 8 will be wounded on 5s. Although you may reroll wounds, this will add still a whole bunch of wounds on top of it because you have so many rerolls and everything. It will just make them far, far more dependable. So I think it's not bad for 1 command point. The only problem side is, of course, you don't have any AP there. Maybe if they had an ability where if they got 6s, it'd be like Rens, the old Ren rule, where it caused maybe -3 AP, then oh boy, these guys would probably see a big difference. But it's just, you know, it's not there. You know, it's a bit tricky on that side. But buffing up the strength 5, there's going to be situations where that's going to be hugely useful. The Pharaoh's Will. 1 command point. Use a stratagem after an overlord from your army has used My Will Be Done or Wave of Command. The model can immediately use that ability for a second time this turn. You'll probably find this more popular on range units, especially if you go Novak, where you're already rerolling misses for combat anyway. However, never doubt this ability to add +1 to hit, and on 2 units it will be super useful. Harder to pull off depending on the charges, but overall just a great ability for 1 command point and just help the Flayed Ones get the maximum amount of attacks to hit. So that's my thoughts on Flayed Ones. I think this is, you know, a unit that does need to be badly rethought. Simply put, you know, they are very light, so they are going to get shredded themselves. So maybe a point reduction just by a few points would make them be more viable, or maybe a way to augment their AP so they can get through armor would be a little bit better as well. Just the way they're currently standing, small arms fire is going to shred them, and they are a huge points investment that it just will devastate them, especially in large units where you're not immune to morale either. It will just more or less wipe them off the board. Yeah, if you make that charge, great, but if you fail it, it's going to absolutely be devastating and it's going to cost you a lot in terms of points. So thanks again for watching, guys. Please comment, share, like and subscribe. Interested to hear what you think of Flayed Ones. I've got like 15 of them waiting to get painted, so we bring them up to a unit of 20. Should I? Well, you know, we're obviously trying to bring as many units and variety to battle reports as we can, but you know, interested in what people say in the comments, just to say whether I should move them up to priority of the painting or maybe look at some other units. Oh, we'll see what you guys say. Also check us out on social media, you know, have a look in there because I've got a good bunch of projects working on there as well as Patreon, so you can basically support the channel, bring you more content, because we absolutely love doing so. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see you on our Tabletop Assault Battle Report.